everyone. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach and author of the book, A Life to Die For. And I just want to say this is episode number 158. And today we're going to be talking about empowered transformation from the inside out. I'd like to remind everyone who's on the live presentation that this is live, and so I would like to encourage you to participate by, posting your questions and comments in the chat area on the left side of the screen. And if you can't see that, you might have to click on a link to expand the tab. But once it's open, then you can just type whatever you like, and we will do our best to respond to your questions and comments as we go. And maybe you can take a moment and just say hi and where you're from and give us your name is already shown there, so I can see that. But I see we got Jenny on board and she said hi. So hi, Jenny, and welcome. So why don't we just get started? Have you noticed that we seem to have a love-hate relationship with the idea of transformation? On the one hand, we all seem to want to grow into the best possible versions of ourselves, and we engage in all kinds of processes, activities, workshops, and seminars to make that happen. On the other hand, we all seem to have a basic fear of change. Not so much because we fear the change itself, but rather because we don't know for sure what the change is going to bring. And I think what that means is we're more afraid of the unknown than we are of pretty much anything else. But this awareness leads us to a couple of key questions. How can we minimize the fear and foster our own growth? How can we empower and encourage an uplifting and exciting form of transformation in our lives that moves us closer to the fulfillment of our dreams? Well, to help us examine this issue in some detail, I've invited an expert on the subject of compassion and transformation. She's the owner and founder of Prism Holistic Coaching and Consulting, where she works with individuals and businesses to clarify who they are, what they want, and how to move forward in alignment with their truth. After having many different empowered transformations of her own, she's found her calling as a life coach and consultant, writer, speaker, and workshop host. So please welcome my friend and colleague, Joanne Wenner, to today's program. Welcome, Joanne. Come on camera so we can all see your beautiful face. And I'm just so delighted to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here. And compassion and transformation, yes, they are two of my favorite things to delve into, to talk about, to write about. It's been a lifelong journey for me. So, yes, I've been working in this realm my whole life. In fact, I hadn't really thought about it that way for a while until someone asked me to write a story about how I got here. And
perfect.
In that process, I thought, you know what? I've done this my entire life. I grew up in a family of 8 kids. I was right in the middle, one of 2 girls, 6 boys. And my dad and my mom had this inherited 5-generational business from my dad's side that started out as basically a mercantile kind of trading post in Minnesota. And by the time it got to my dad's generation, when he was a little boy, it was a funeral parlor, a hardware store, kind of a fix-it shop for lots of different things. And as he was the oldest son, he had to take over the business. So by the time he was 13, 14, and all the men were off in World War II, he and his friends who were, maybe just starting high school, maybe 8th graders, they were driving tractors in the farmers' fields. And my dad's father told him he had to start an ambulance business with him. So he, at the age of 14, 15, started driving ambulance. And there's crazy stories about that. Driving through snowstorms, going out to farms, getting people in the back of a farmer's, wagon, putting them in a truck, going through snowstorms in Minnesota. It's crazy. But what it did for us was bring this long-term, I guess, grounding in serving others and serving people in tragedy and loss. By the time I was born, my parents had a funeral, had a funeral home, and the ambulance service was still part of our life. And so these emergency calls came into our house constantly.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, we had the dial phones, and
Oh, yeah.
there was no call waiting or anything either. So if somebody couldn't get a hold of my dad at his place of business, they called our home line. So we weren't allowed to be on the phone except to answer it as if it's an emergency call. So I started thinking about how that played out in my life, where my life always revolved around people's suffering, really. Their, tragic losses, sometimes happiness. My dad also ended up delivering babies in farmers' fields and things like that. But really, it was families that we knew because we lived in the community, and it was their losses that we were involved in. And it really was interesting. I spent about a month with that this summer, really thinking about that, going deep inside and thinking, this is where it all started. This is where I learned about what it means to have compassion. And so we'll get into that a little bit about what compassion means, because I know that's one of the topics I'm called to talk about today.
Right.
So do you want me to delve into that now?
No, we'll go into that as we proceed. I wanted to just say, so you've had a lot of exposure in your lifetime to the experience of helping other people get through tragedies and whatever's going on for them. I'm curious about your own story of suffering. How did you, I personally, I went for a long time in my life not really understanding what compassion meant. I knew it intellectually, but I didn't know it internally as an experienced feeling. I didn't know that I didn't realize I had known it. I'll put it that way, until I remember being in a men's group and watching another man doing his work. And his work was so similar to the kind of suffering and stuff that I went through for myself in my life, that as he was going through his process, I had a visceral experience of what that was like for him. I was experiencing empathy and a desire to help him resolve his issue all at the same time. And here I was, a witness rather than a participant. And I was kind of required to stay quiet and in the background watching as he did his work. So it wasn't until then that I really understood what compassion really was. And I think that might be true for a lot of people. So I'm curious for you, if you had a personal experience in your life that really helped you to have a felt experience of what compassion really is, and what that might have been like for you.
That's an interesting question, because I believe that I was taught compassion from a really young age. And the difference that I will say is, I would, work down at the funeral home sometimes or attend wakes of people I knew. And I would see sympathy in action, where people express their sympathy. They're very, very sorry for the loss,
Right.
of someone else. Sympathy, however, doesn't mean that you go into the suffering.
Correct.
So that's where we get into empathy. Empathy is you are in that act of, maybe starts with a feeling of sympathy, but you've had something inside of you that is familiar with the feeling of another person. It may be something that you're born with. It may be something all of us are born with it, but maybe it's something that is triggered in you. Some people have it shut off, but often it's triggered in us, and we feel what other people are feeling. And
Right.
Some people can't shut that off, and that's a whole nother story. But then we have this empathy for them. We understand their suffering. We go into it with them. And, for two people together, that can alleviate some suffering for someone. They're not alone anymore. And that's a big thing. But when you talk about compassion, it is this need to It's to go into the suffering through empathy, but it is to alleviate the suffering. Like there's action that's actually required in compassion. So we enter in and we're called to help alleviate the suffering. And so I learned from an early age, I think, that the art of compassion, I'm going to call it an art because it's something we have to continually cultivate and practice in our lives. And to alleviate the suffering requires you to do something active to try to lift them out of it. So it can be as simple as, you know, baking them a cake or writing a card to somebody, or, you know, and it can be more difficult. It can be actually going in. My dad used to do this, follow up with people, and my mom did as well, months, weeks, you know, a year later, and say, and sit down with them and say, how are you doing now? You know, what can I help you with? Just getting involved a little bit more in their life to try to give them a leg up on moving through this sorrow to the other side of it. And, you know, I worked as a candy striper in a nursing home in my junior high years also, and I was always, I think, cultivating compassion and working to alleviate the suffering of the people that I interacted with. But your question, the point that I never really understood till much later in my life was the idea of self-compassion. I learned compassion for others and to move out of myself to help alleviate the suffering of another. But there was never any talk about how we did this for ourselves.
Right. And I want to get into that in a second, but I want to just hold off before we do that because I think personally, and maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, but my personal belief is that I can't really be compassionate with someone else until I learn self-compassion. And isn't it ironic that we try to express compassion outwardly without dealing with that inner self piece? And this is what I've learned for myself. As soon as I started to become skilled at self-compassion, suddenly my ability to be compassionate with other people just magnified many times over. So that's first of all, that's one point I want to make. The other point is, you know, I talk about compassion in some detail in my book, A Life to Die For. I have a whole chapter on that topic. And my understanding of compassion is very similar to yours. I think our wording might be a little different. But the way I approach it is I do talk about the difference between sympathy, empathy, and compassion. So I find it interesting that you chose those three words to bring into the conversation. And as you said, sympathy is like, I feel sorry for somebody. I have pity for. And that's not really an empowering emotion at all. It's kind of, hey, well, I'm sorry that happened to you, and I'm going to go have a cup of coffee now, you know. Or there's empathy, which is kind of a form of projection that I found, where you have some kind of an issue going on, a challenge going on, and I can empathize because I can relate to that challenge, perhaps through the same kind of experience or a similar kind of experience. So I can imagine the kind of pain you're feeling, and therefore I have my own pain. And so you see, that is a kind of projection onto you. And then, as you say, compassion is bringing that empathy and applying some action to it. Now, I think where you and I differ is I believe that compassion is, I don't actually have to do any action in order to be compassionate. I simply have to feel that desire, the drive, the impulse to take action. Because one thing I've noticed in my experience with compassion is if I simply act without somehow engaging the other person, I may be actually doing them a disservice. I may be taking them out of a necessary experience in their lives, preventing them from gaining something that they're meant to have. And so it really is my responsibility as a compassionate person to ask first before taking any kind of action to try and help them get out of whatever suffering they might have. That's been my perspective.
Well, I do agree with you with most of it, but I do have a little different take on it. I think that compassion for ourselves. You know, I don't think you can have compassion with another without understanding what compassion is. You know, compassion to me is, the whole word is such a beautiful word, because com, C-O-M, comes from the Anglo-Franco word that means with, to be with something.
Correct. With
And then
that.
you have passion, which is this desire, this fired up desire. And then you have compass, which is one of my favorite words ever, which is, you know, leading us to our true north, our true self deep within. So I think that in any practice of compassion, all of that has to be happening. So I think you know, growing up, I did have an inner compass, I think, that was really strong. But also I was taught that our work is toward others. You know, you don't really think about yourself. So on some level, I had it for myself, because I couldn't have gone out of myself toward another without having that reserve inside of me. But it wasn't something that I asked for help. You know, I wasn't really raised to show my own suffering. It was hidden. It was in those quiet nights alone, where I went inside and I had beautiful spiritual experiences, knowing I was never alone, and, you know, accessing compassion in, I guess I would say, an ethereal form. But I really believe that compassion is active. I understand what you're saying and agree that we can't do acts, we can't just throw acts at people of kindness or goodness, but we need to be invited in. So I think that yes, we need to have permission to go there. So I'm not going to go and spew these things on somebody, but I will ask, which is in the work that I do with others, it is self-directed from the person that I work with.
Sure. But I mean, I just wanted to say, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've had plenty of experiences in my life that were painful, that caused suffering for me personally, that may have caused suffering for other people as a result of my own suffering. Yes. But had I not gone through those experiences, I might not know myself today as well as I do. So what I'm saying is, sometimes we have to go through that suffering. It's kind of like the hero's journey. It's the, you know, we go through life and we're on a certain level, and then we drop into this pit, and it may seem like a pit of despair, and it may seem like the entire world has abandoned us or whatever. But then we have to go through some kind of an awakening, a learning, a connecting to the spiritual truth of who we are, so that we can bring ourselves out of this pit and take the learning with us and share that with the rest of the people on our path. I think all of us go through multiple occurrences of this hero's journey in our life. And if someone just came along and said, oh, you fell into a pit, and pulled you out before you had a chance to learn, that might not serve you. And even though this person who's doing it is doing it out of a sense of compassion or desire to prevent suffering. So what I'm saying is, I think that the desire to lift someone out of suffering is a sufficient form. And then, I have this desire to stop this person suffering. So now I can approach the person and say, okay, so it looks like you're having some challenges. Is there something I can do to help you with this? And then give them a chance to empower themselves to say, yeah, if you could take this bear trap off my leg and prevent me from dying, that would be awesome. Or whatever the situation might be. I'm trying to be a little bit facetious here, but you get my point.
Yeah, no, I agree. You need to be invited in. And compassion has nothing to do with taking away someone's suffering.
Exactly.
That's impossible to do, because, as you said, it's a work that comes from it comes from within us to do that for ourselves. Nobody can take it away. If they do, it's so momentary, and it takes our power away that, you know, I don't know why you would want to do that. But on the other hand, if we can,
we do that.
Yeah. Compassion, though, is this desire to help alleviate it, to journey with someone for a while. maybe, I mean, for example, in my coaching, it's to journey with someone until they feel strong enough to really do it on their own. My job is to work myself out of a job with everybody, you know. Otherwise, I'm not doing what I'm here to do.
Right,
I don't want dependencies, you know. And you're right also in the other point, David, and that is we all have our own, what, you know, you want to call it suffering. It definitely feels like suffering when you're in it, and I've had my share, believe me. And when I look at it, though, in retrospect, it really was a gift, one I wouldn't have chosen, but one that was given to me. And
right.
it really brings back this idea of beauty. You know, the world is full of beautiful things. Um, it really is. You know, it's about perspective. Yes, there is a lot of suffering in the world. There's suffering in our communities. There's suffering with our own families. We're never free of some of that suffering ourselves. We're human. You know, we're physical beings. We have all these senses.
Right.
But it's part of us that's divine. So it's really tapping back into that place of us that is beyond this world. It came with us, to me, came with us here. We will leave and move back into it as a whole being afterwards. But right now we're having this physical experience, and that includes suffering, you know,
Yeah.
however you want to look at it.
Right. I just wanted to draw attention to Jenny's comment here. I like what she said. She says she loves the deeper understanding of the word compassion as you described it, Joanne. And she said, recently I heard a breakdown of passion, P-A-S-S-I-on, and ion being a molecule with a charged an electric charge. Now, I think that's pretty interesting. What do you have to say to that?
No, I think that's wonderful. That's beautiful. Yes, it is. It's, you know, when I say the word passion, I mean, when you feel that, when you felt passion, that's exactly what it is. It feels like your body all of a sudden is empowered. It's charged up. It's revved up. It's ready to go beyond ourselves. And that's what compassion is. It's this willingness to go beyond ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. That's lovely.
That's beautiful. So thank you for that.
We welcome comments. You know, if you have questions and comments, please put them in the chat.
Yeah, right.
Love to have them.
So so we've talked a little bit about compassion, and I think we have a general agreement about what compassion is. I think most people will agree with what we've said so far. Now, when you and I talked before actually doing this, we also talked about this idea of tolerance and forgiveness. And I want to bring those into the conversation because I think those are important aspects too. And so I'd like to hear your perspective, how you frame these two ideas of tolerance and forgiveness.
Well, I think, and maybe this is jumping ahead a little bit about where you want to go, but I don't think I can talk about tolerance and forgiveness, just like we couldn't really get through compassion without thinking about it as something for ourselves. You know, usually you recently, I saw an episode of yours, and it's in Soul Mastery.
Soul Empowerment, yeah, that's my other show.
Soul Empowerment, where you were talking with Nancy Stevens about the shadow sides and things like that. And, you know, I think that intolerance and the inability to forgive, until we can do it, it's going to keep showing up in our lives. You know, it's going to show up in new people that enter our lives, new situations over and over and over again, because in order to really live a life of purpose and meaning, I feel, and to be at our most fulfilled place in this time on earth, we have to be able to practice forgiveness. We have to be able to tolerate, very carefully using the word tolerate, what's happening around us. But it all comes back to me, again, to this inner compass, because my compass is off kilter if I can't be forgiving. it's spinning around. It's making me dizzy. I am human. I make mistakes. If people couldn't forgive me, where would I be? And it's the same with other relationships in my life. And forgiving, I think forgiveness is often misunderstood. Forgiving doesn't mean that you have to go back into a deep relationship with someone, but it means that you are able to extend enough love to let that go from your life. Whatever that is that required forgiveness, you are able to release that from your life by an act of forgiveness toward another person. But again, I think a lot of times people get it confused because they think, well, if I forgive them, then this situation is going to continue. Well, the situation will only continue if it's something that you haven't let go of.
Yeah,
So it's a process of release. Forgiveness is releasing.
sure, exactly. That's exactly right. And one thing that I tell people, and I say this very, very strongly, I said, forgiveness has nothing to do, zero to do with the other person.
Right.
It is 100% to do with you.
Yes.
So when you say, but what, if I forgive this person, then that'll mean that I'm saying it's okay and all this. I said, no, you're simply saying I release. This person no longer has control over my thoughts, my feelings, my desire for revenge, my desire for vengeance, or any of that stuff. I am simply releasing it. That's all that forgiveness is. I mean, there's more to it than that, but that's essentially, in the long term, that's what it is. It's letting go of any desire for revenge or getting even or any of that stuff, because that's all ego mind chatter, and it's all shadow based. So I'm glad you brought up shadow, by the way, because that's what happens. So resistance to forgiveness has to do with shadow and has nothing to do with internal unconditional love. And so
in a way it does, though. I think in a way it does, because I can forgive somebody 1,000 times over, but if I have not forgiven myself, it's going to keep showing up.
Well, no, but wait, you're talking about something different now.
Well,
I'm strictly talking about forgiving the other person. And forgiving yourself is a completely different animal. It's in the same way that self-compassion is a different animal. I'm trying to separate out these pieces so people can understand, conceptually how they all fit together. That's all. So, so you were saying something about what happens to the other person when I forgive them. It doesn't matter what happens to the other person.
No, it doesn't
matter. So similarly, if someone else chooses not to forgive me, that has no impact on me. No. That's their issue, not mine. Right. So, and we can move into self-compassion and self-forgiveness. I think we should talk about those.
Well, and self-tolerance.
Okay, and however you want tolerance to fit into this discussion too.
Yeah. I think tolerance is a very interesting word. I think there are behaviors that we do not need to tolerate, and they will show up in our life in close relationship to us. I'm not talking about in the big world, because there's lots of things we might find intolerable in the big world. But I'm talking about in personal relationships with people. I think, compassion brings us into conversation with them where we can, try to work through these things.
Right.
Sometimes tolerance really can be achieved by looking at what it is within ourselves that makes that intolerable for us. There can be, this can be a whole nother conversation too. There can be triggers within us from past experiences that have nothing to do with this person or this relationship, but it triggers those. So then I have to go back inside and do my own work about that. And then there are other things that just cross barriers that are your boundaries, your own personal boundaries that are from self-love and self-compassion.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think that tolerance is one of those things that Personally, it's not a word I use in my everyday vocabulary. It's just not something that comes up. Maybe occasionally I might use the word, but it's pretty rare, because I think that the problem, what I have learned in the work that I've done, is I learned that whatever I tolerate is what tends to show up in my life. And sometimes we, in our effort to not rock the boat, in our effort to, to be seen as the nice person, or, the joker or whatever, we may tolerate bad behaviors rather than speak up about them. And that puts me, when I do that, when I tolerate something because I want to be seen as a nice person or whatever, I'm actually violating my own integrity. I'm not being honest and true with who I really am. And that's all part of the shadow part of myself that says, oh, you better not speak up, because if you speak up, someone's going to argue with you and you're going to get into a conflict and this and that and blah, 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 blah. And yet, when we don't speak up, what happens is we're tacitly tolerating something. So I think that there is a way in which, if we want to be true to ourselves, if we want to be true to the essence of who we are, then we have to speak up. And this is where compassion comes back in now.
Yes, it does.
Because there are ways of speaking compassionately to somebody and saying, and showing that you're not willing to tolerate something, while still at the same time loving the person for being who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing with it, it absolutely brings us back to compassion, because if we are actively practicing compassion toward ourselves, we are keeping boundaries. We don't tolerate things that take away our essence, I've had those experiences with people where what they said they needed to do, as in behaviors, to make their life more enjoyable and be free and all of that, was taking away my freedoms and my life enjoyment. So I think that, that as an act of compassion to ourselves, sometimes it's not that we do, something, we just choose differently. I guess that's where we are most self-responsible. We make different choices. I can tolerate being in a large group with people that I don't agree with, but I'm not going to choose to have intimate personal relationships with them. And I think it also goes back to communication, that there's a lot of work to be done around compassionate conversations with people. Absolutely. Because the more common ground we can find underneath all the noise, the more that brings us into those places where we navigate it from our inner compass, and we can bring other people into that place within themselves, and then we get to the truth of what this conversation is really about, and hopefully we can move forward. So that's also work I do with groups, is to find that common place, as a common place within our shared humanity, where that's compassion, but all of this comes down to beginning inside ourselves, finding our own inner compass, in order to do that work. So,
well, that's beautiful, and you've brought into the discussion the notion of relationship, and how we can, especially let's say more, when I use the word intimate, I don't mean a sexual relationship. I mean a relationship of connection with somebody. And the beauty of having a relationship like that, where you may, even with a very, very close relationship, have a partner or a relationship partner who does things that you don't like. And you may want to, set a boundary on those things. And so this is where having a conversation and actually describing, this behavior bothers me because, and going into some deep work on it to understand what's really at the root of that, so that the person can either change the behavior or you can get deeper understanding about what's really causing this. And the beauty of that is you both have the opportunity to grow in that case. And you may come to an agreement between the two of you that, okay, I won't use that behavior around you because I can see what kind of pain it causes for you. And I'll try to find some other way of expressing myself. This is an important piece that we often overlook. So you talk about compassionate communication, and that's what that really is all about. So thank you for bringing that up.
Well, and I think it takes a lot of courage. I don't think you can act compassionately without courage, which is, the place of your raging heart, because it has to move you outside of yourself. And just going back to what you were talking about before in relationship with each other, I do believe that I have, as you know, David, I have 7 children. So I have these opportunities all the time to continue this practice within myself and with others. But I often find that I will watch if something is feeling kind of intolerable to me about the way one of my children are behaving. I first go inside of myself. I've learned to do this, to say, why is this bothering me so much?
Yeah.
No one else seems bothered by this. Why is this bothering me so much? And inevitably, I'll find this Achilles heel inside of me. This
Beautiful.
place I've been wounded before, and this is triggering a memory of that. And so all you can do is say, thank you. I need to do some work on this. And then, as your mom, I still might find some of this not tolerable.
Sure. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
I'll come back to you from a place of understanding, a place of reflection, which I think is always so important. To have this self-reflection before we go and challenge somebody else about what's happening in their life and how they're bothering us.
That is, that's a beautiful thing. And it just reminds me, I think you've heard the statement, it's all about me. Well, ultimately, that is probably the only truth. Well, one of the only truths in the world. Anything that I think, say, do, or feel is about me, it's not about you. Even if I'm giving you feedback about something, it's still about me. And that's one of the things that we forget. We think, oh, it's your fault that this happened and that I feel this way. Sorry, no, it's not. You just did what you did, and I had my reaction. And I'm responsible for that reaction, not you, no matter what kind of a situation it might be. So I think this is amazing to me that we're even going in this direction, but I love it. It is really all about me. And I think if we own that from the deeper sense, it's not about I'm trying to make, the entire world revolve around me, but I have to understand that whenever I have a reaction of some kind, that is about me. So thank you for that too. It was great that you brought that up.
Well, I think it's one of those places that's a bit of a conundrum, because we can't really understand how something's affecting us without going inside of ourselves and figuring that part out.
Yeah.
But after we do that, it is about going outside of ourselves. That's where responsibility comes in. It's a responsiveness to whatever it is we've learned. Then responding differently in the world.
Sure.
So it's calling us into this action. And I think that's, I think that's where self-responsibility comes in, to go inside of ourselves, to heal or work through whatever it is that's bothering us, to ground ourselves and then respond. And
Absolutely.
Sometimes that means we have to come to new ground. We can't sit mired in our own muck. We have to rise up onto into some new ground.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, but you see, at the same time, if I'm willing to recognize that it is about me, that it is my reaction, and then I go inside and I do whatever work I need to do, it may turn out that my only response would be, thank you for showing me that. And there's nothing more to say.
Well, I think actually it's thank you for showing me that, but it is, I think response is always then a very natural part of the next stage.
Right, but like I'm just
maybe
saying,
it's not a
there may not
response
be,
to this,
a
but it's a
response may
response
not
in
be
the next.
necessary is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, I was going to say, instead of, it might not be a response to this exactly, but it's a response the next time this shows up. I have a different response. You know, I have learned, I have grown, I respond differently.
Yes, and if you're anything like me, you may respond the same way the second time around, and maybe the third and the fourth and the fifth, or even the 100th time. It might take that 101st time before you finally get that it's about you.
Well, and sometimes we respond really well after we've learned a lesson, and then we're in a place where we're tired, we're hungry, we haven't, you know, whatever it is, and we go back to that old trigger and that old way of reacting rather than responding. Sure. And then again, we go through this cycle of, okay, what's called for here? I did that, okay. I have to forgive myself, you know, right. Practice a little tolerance. I'm human, I messed up, I'll do it again. But that doesn't make me a bad person.
No,
you know, that's where the self-compassion comes in. Well,
right.
You know, in my work, this is an important piece because people often will beat themselves up a lot, you know, like, and feel that they've made this huge mistake. And what I do is help them understand that we are human and divine. I mean, we are both, and we're here to learn through this experience. So, and to also show them you never go back to that starting place. You know, you have learned something along the way, and even the fact that you understand and in immediacy, an immediate reaction inside yourself, like, oh crap, you know, that wasn't how I should have responded in this moment. Or it was a reactive thing. But we also then can practice not only forgiveness with ourselves, but we can go back to those people and say, hey, you know, and I've done this. Hey, you know, I am truly sorry. I want to be better than that. So
you know,
we do this again.
Joanne, you are saying things that I'm thinking, and it's happening over and over and over in this conversation. So, you know, I think we're definitely on the same wavelength here. We just have a different way of expressing it. That's all, and I love it. I think it's awesome. So let me go to let me just shift gears a little bit here. I mean, I think some of this will be self-evident for people, but let's just try and delineate some of the specific benefits of loving compassion. Why on earth should I learn how to be a loving, compassionate person?
Well, I would ask, why wouldn't you want to be a loving, compassionate person? But no, that's not your question. Why do I want this in my life? Well, I have to say from experience, when we exude that kind of energy, that's the energy that comes back to us. And who doesn't need loving and compassionate responses in their life from the people that surround them? I mean, that's one thing. The way that it improves our relationships is immeasurable. You know, the other thing, and this maybe is going to seem a little far out there, but the more that this has developed inside of me, the more I can go out into the natural world and feel that loving and compassionate response in the world around me. In water, in trees, and everything else. I feel like the natural world lives in this place of this loving compassion. It's this breathing organism. And if, you know, a lot of times if you're practicing loving compassion and you're out in the natural world, maybe through a little bit of breathing, all of a sudden you feel and understand that wow, I'm actually breathing with the waves. I'm breathing with the breezes of the trees. Um, it just makes you feel so whole in ways that are hard to describe. Um, and then you bring that back, you know, that goes within inside of you, and then you bring that back into the next person that you meet or the next situation you encounter. This living, breathing organism of being alive on this world in a very active state of passionate response to ourselves and those around us. And there's no end to where this can go. This is what I tell my coaching clients too. There's no end to this. I'm getting more and more excited day by day, month by month, year by year in where this is taking my life, because I feel more and more alive the longer I live. And, I think that it's available to all of us. And there's no bottom, there's no end within ourselves of how deep we can go, how far we can go. It's an unimaginable pool with a depth that has no bottom. I don't know how else to put it. The more we practice love, the more love comes back to us.
Right. So I just wanted to point out that your response is coming from a place of your level of consciousness and your level of experience. And so the things that you're talking about might sound kind of airy and esoteric to some people who maybe haven't gotten to that level of experience.
Yeah.
So what I want to point out is, if you are still maybe in a more physical kind of sense, the practice of compassion can actually impact you in a physical way. And this is really important for people to understand, because the more you practice compassion, what you do by practicing compassion is you start to reduce your tendency to focus on the negative. And this has a huge impact on your overall life. You're going to reduce your stress. You're going to reduce cortisol in your body, and you're going to actually feel a physical difference. Secondly, when you actually help someone to get out of suffering, you suddenly start to feel that sense of, wow, I did something good. That's oxytocin moving around in your head and other endorphins that are happening in your brain. It feels good physically in your body. And so who doesn't want less stress?
Right.
Who doesn't want more happiness?
Right.
Those are two things that can happen almost immediately as you start to practice compassion. And then when you start to focus that compassion on yourself, well, it just kind of magnifies, as I said earlier. So then you get to be someone like Joanne, who has all these other wonderful experiences of bottomless, depthless oceans of love flowing back and forth in waves of air and water. I mean, who doesn't want that?
Well, thank you for bringing the conversation back to ground. I do appreciate that, David. And I have to say that that has been true in my own life, as far as learning more and more about compassion for myself actually changed the trajectory of a very debilitating illness in my life. And all through the ways you say, practicing self-compassion in deeper and deeper ways brought me to a ground where I learned that I really wanted to spend time in a place where I've practiced some self-love that I had never practiced before in my life. Getting enough sleep, putting my needs. It's like the whole thing, and I know this is overused, but it always comes up. Putting that oxygen mask on yourself first before you can help the people next to you, because I was that person that would have, helped everybody else before myself. And it took a big toll on myself and my life and my body and my relationships. So learning self-compassion brought me to self-love. And that was really important. And as you said, very, very healing in my life.
Well, and that's really important. And I think that people need to remember this. You know, we have been taught through our religions, through culture, through society, and through various other mechanisms that we're supposed to put other people's needs ahead of our own. And okay, I mean, on some level, I think I see where they're coming from. But as you mentioned, Joanne, if you don't put your own oxygen mask on first, then you're going to be dead and you're going to be useless to other people. So make sure you take care of yourself. That's important. Self-care, self-love, self-compassion, self-forgiveness has to happen before you can go out and start healing and saving the world.
Yes.
And we all really, ultimately, that's what we all want to do, is we want to have a major positive impact in the world. So if that's true, and I believe it is for most of us, except maybe for the psychopaths, and there's very few of those around actually, then the truth of the matter is most of us want to make a positive difference in the world. And so let's start by healing ourselves. And then maybe we can emulate the words of Mahatma Gandhi, and that is to be the change we want to see in the world. So self-care is critical.
Self-care is critical, and many of us don't learn that as a child, or anywhere along the way. But I really think that parents of today are doing a much better job of that with their children. I think there are more people in tune to the importance of self-care, so they're modeling it for their children. Me being a child of somebody from Depression era, that wasn't modeled at all. And you have to pick it up at some point, you hope. But that it is so true. It's some of the work I do with my clients, only because you can't teach what you haven't learned yourself. So I had to spend years learning this myself before I could help and coach other people with that. And that is this idea that you are important, you are loved, you are here for a purpose. And let's start with you. Let's just start with you.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what people do with that once that sinks into them, into their body, into their heart, into their mind, that I am important, I matter. And I do have work I want to do here. I do have a way I want to show up and be in the world. And so that's the clarity that we all need.
Right. And speaking of clarity, now I want to come back to a subject that you mentioned right back at the beginning of our conversation. You talked about this thing called the inner compass. Mm-hmm. And I'd like you to just give us a couple of minutes explaining what that means to you and how we can connect to our own inner compass.
Sure. It's interesting that I don't know how many of you have heard of Pema Chodron, but she has, in one of her books, she talks about how it's an illusion that we ever can actually stand still and be in the world, because the world is always moving, it's always changing. That's why we're alive. It's like what Jenny talked about, the ions of energy there. We're activating these ions of energy all the time, these charges around us from within us. And so she said that our job here really is to learn how to continuously move in order to have a way of staying here. To continually make these micro adjustments in our lives. I'm not talking about like this monumental one-time change and my whole world exploded and nothing's ever going to be the same. I mean, that can happen, but it's rare. But we're all capable of making these little micro adjustments. Just this little step, this little step, this little step. And enough of those, of course, lead us down a path. So when I talk about the inner compass, I talk about, we're actually on this moving vessel. We're actually always in movement. So we need a compass. We need to continue to come back to our true north. And how do we do that? How do we find our inner compass? It is a journey of all the things we've talked about. You know, it's a journey through self-love, self-compassion, to find that place within us that actually has been there all along, that doesn't change. You know, it's our true north. It's who we came here to be. It's who we, if we can find this, and we'll see glimpses of it. That's what even these little micro changes bring us, is new glimpses, new pixels into this large picture that is coming alive of who we are and why we're here. And I have to say, I don't know how much of my picture is done or how much anybody else's is, but I want more pixels to come in. So I want more color. I want more liveliness, you know.
Well, you know, as you're talking about these micro changes, I have a little metaphor that I give people, and that is basically, if you imagine that you're on a life journey, we can symbolize that life journey as a flight from Los Angeles to New York. Well, that airplane that flies from Los Angeles to New York is off course about 100% of the time. and it's the same thing when you're driving your car. You know, it's exactly the same thing. The fact of the matter is, it's going to be moving for a while, and our instruments might show it seems to be on course, but then a moment later there's an adjustment, and we have to make continual adjustments, and that's life. And that's life. So if you have no specific destination, then, you know, it may not look like you have any particular adjustments, because you could just flow and who knows where you're going to end up. But if you have a particular goal, a particular passion, a particular mission, a particular focus, that's what you're shooting for. And then the micro adjustments have to come into play. So this is a really interesting perspective. And of course, in order to do that, you do need that inner compass. You need that guidance, that whole system to help you to know when you're off course. And that's the beauty of the whole thing. And in order to know that you're off course, you have to have a sense of getting out of your head, out of this thinking space, and down into the feeling and sensing space of your heart, because that's where your true north is going to be found.
Right, and I really think of it as the soul heart. You know, I think that I believe strongly that we have this place within us that we came with and we will leave with, and you know, whatever you want to call that, it doesn't matter to me. That is where I find the inner compass.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
If we can be quiet enough, it will speak to us. Exactly. And we know when it's true, because it really comes from a place of love.
Right. And it resonates. It resonates. You feel it in your bones, in your body. You feel it everywhere. Yeah. And sometimes, though, you know, you really have to be quiet, because it'll whisper. You know, that's the other thing. It starts off whispering, but if you don't pay attention, it will get louder. And there was one time in my life where I said, I know this has to change, but I'm just not able to do it. You might have to hit me on the head. Well, I got hit on the head. Literally, within 24 hours, I was running a basket of laundry up some wooden steps with wool socks on, which wasn't smart. But I slipped and banged myself literally right between the eyes. And that was fun. That was fun, yeah.
You know, concussion, black and blue face. But it made me stop. It made me stop. It made me lay in bed in darkness for a couple of days. And I sorted everything out in that time. So
Did you sort the laundry out?
Huh?
Did you sort the laundry?
Oh, I don't know what happened to the laundry. Someone else has to.
That's a great story. I like that. Well, you know,
but really,
Joanne,
you
it's hard
know,
to believe, but we're almost at the end of our time. And I just wanted to know if there's something you'd like to say to finish before we wrap up. And maybe you have a gift or something you'd like to offer?
you know, my gift, I do have a gift I'd love to offer, and that is I'm going to record, because I didn't get to do one today, I'm going to record a meditation. And so if you would like to receive the short guided meditation into your inner compass and into compassion and self-love, maybe just somehow reach out to me. I'm going to put my email address down here in the chat box. And if you reach out to me and just say, even in the headline, meditation or whatever you want to say, I will record this and send it off to you.
That sounds
I
fabulous.
wasn't prepared
Let me ask you this. Can I ask you to send me a copy of that recording as well? And I will add it to the recording page where this thing gets saved. And that way people can listen to it there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
And my website is the end of that, prismholistic.com, if you want to go out and take a look at my work.
Awesome. Well, that'd be awesome to receive. Thank you so much, Joanne. I really appreciate it. And I want to thank you all for being here today to watch today's program. I want to thank Helke, is it? And Jackie Lynn, Jenny, Jerome, Jim, Joanne. I'm just so glad that you all joined us, and I'm glad you were able to be here with us. I hope you got something out of this. And in a few hours, I'd like to remind you that you're going to receive an email with a link to a feedback page. And my request is that you take a few minutes to write us a heartfelt, authentic review coming from your heart, coming from this place of loving compassion, so that we can encourage other people to join us for future episodes. Also, I want to remind you that you can get the recording of this and every other episode of Life Mastery TV on my website at life-mastery-tv.com. So with that said, let's all just take a breath for a moment, because this has been a kind of a whirlwind. Take a deep breath, relax, and I'm going to ask you to remember to practice the Life Mastery mantra every day this week. And it goes like this. It's a 3-part mantra. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So thank you again, everyone. And until we meet again, my name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. So bye-bye for now.
Bye.